Yeah. Family, y'all. Just keep it tight, keep it tight, keep it tight. Oh, right. Yeah. Here we go.
So, what have we been doing during this course? We've been going through history and going, phase by phase in the history of the church. That was the beginning of the church. We shared a loaf of bread and a cup of wine in Jesus' memory. And that seemed to be it. I mean, we gathered every Sunday morning to share this loaf of bread and share this cup of wine as a symbol of our unity. And we noticed how it was that over time we started to interpret that act way differently, such that what we were doing by the 11th and 12th and 13th centuries was something that the early church probably would not have recognized. We were introducing all sorts of philosophical terms and talking about the somatic presence of Christ. Just a brief review, what is the somatic presence of Christ? Somatic comes from the Greek word soma, which means body. So we were trying to figure out how it is that these bodies of Christ fit together. On the one hand, there's the body of the historical Jesus. We often talk about the threefold body of Christ. There's the body of the historical Jesus. If Jesus lived like we live, then Jesus was a human being and Jesus had a body like us. So when he said at the Last Supper, "This is my body," or "This is my blood," the question becomes, how do we interpret that? Because his body was the flesh that he had himself. So the threefold body of Christ. The second body is the Eucharistic body of Christ. So somehow how it is that the bread and wine that we share is the body of Christ as well. So Jesus had a body, the body of Christ. When we talk about the Eucharist, we're talking about the body of Christ as the Eucharistic body of Christ. And then the other bodies of Christ are the body of the resurrected Christ, which simply means that when Christ rose from the dead, we don't believe that Christ had the same fleshly body that he had before, because we know that Christ ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of the Father in this new existence. It's not the same fleshly body in the same sense that we have. The other body of Christ that we've been talking about is the body of Christ, which is the church. We often refer to the church as the body of Christ, which is why St. Augustine said, "Be what you receive." You're receiving the body of Christ. Now it's time for you, the church, to be the body of Christ. You receive the body of Christ in the Eucharist. Now it's time for you to be the body of Christ. Now as we're going toward the early Middle Ages, what we're going to see then is that in the last class we talked about Augustine, essentially the early church up through the likes of Augustine. But now we have other views toward the early Middle Ages. The question that they're going to have is, what is this thing that we're celebrating in the Eucharist? Is it symbolic, or is it something that's really Christ? Is Christ really here, or is Christ symbolically here? How's that for a question? Is Christ really here in the flesh, or is Christ here symbolically? And so we talk about how it is that in the Germanic worldview, up in northern Europe, today what is modern day Germany, essentially the question was, it was this tension between this thingly realism that Christ is really here in the flesh, was one end of the spectrum, or was it that Christ was here simply symbolically, that this bread represents Christ? So that was the question back in the early Middle Ages. Where did we go with that? The thingly realism then focused on things that can be concretely grasped. So in the same way that I hold this marker, it focuses on things that we can taste and touch and feel and that we can get through our senses. And so the focus in that case is on this bread and how it is that Jesus is really physically in this bread. Somehow. We can't explain it yet. We don't have the words. But somehow we believe that Jesus is really in this bread. Symbolism, the opposite side of the spectrum. Is Jesus really in the bread? No, it's simply symbolic. Do you see where they were going with this? So on the one hand, some believed it was symbolic. On the other hand, some believed that somehow Jesus was really in that bread, which led us down different roads, because we talked about last time, if we believe that Jesus is in the bread, is Jesus in every speck of the bread? Well, if Jesus is in every speck of the bread, what did that mean for us come the Middle Ages? It meant that not even a speck of that bread could fall to the floor, because you could hear Jesus screaming all the way down before he hit the floor, right? If you believe that Jesus is in the bread, then he's in every speck of the bread. So is he really in the bread, or is he symbolically in the bread? The Second Council of Nicaea was held in 787. So this is a bit of background now, only because we're setting up where we're going to go here. At the Second Council of Nicaea, we remember the First Council of Nicaea was the council that formulated the creed that we use today. So we have the Nicene Creed. After that was the Second Council of Nicaea in 787. And that council advocated for the veneration of images. Think about it for a moment. What are you doing when you venerate an image? What does it mean to venerate an image? That means that, for instance, we have a picture of Mary or Jesus or one of the saints, and we hold that picture in high regard. You know, we put that picture in a special place. We perhaps even pray in the presence of that picture. We venerate that picture. That picture is somehow special. So the veneration of images, what were the images back then? Back then, the images were icons. So the big controversy is going to be one that centers around icons. What is an icon? Icons were paintings back then of the saints or of Christ. And so the question became, now that we're painting these images, are we praying to Christ and to those saints? Or are we praying to those images, or both? We're going to get to the Eucharist eventually, but we're going to set it up by talking about these icons, these images. So in the Byzantine world, which is in the Eastern Church, in the Byzantine world we had this type of thinking where it talked about the prototype and the image. What's the difference between the prototype and the image? The prototype is the person that is represented by it. So for instance, Christ is the prototype, but then the icon is an image of Christ. Is Christ the icon? No. Christ is the prototype, and then we have this image that's made of the prototype. So far, so good? So the icon is not Christ. Christ is the prototype, or the saint is the prototype, Mary is the prototype, and of those saints, or of Mary, or of Christ, we make images, which back then we called icons. So the thinking back then was that the prototype is present through the image, but not in the image. So Christ is present through this image. Here's the image, this painting of Christ. Is Christ in the image? Christ is not in the image per se, but we have an encounter with Christ through that image. So far, so good? We almost can start making the leap of where it is we're going to go with the Eucharist now. So the prototype, or in this case we use the example of Christ, is present, comes to us, is present through the image. The challenge is that people were debating this whole issue of icons for quite some time after that. Because what was happening is they became two extremes. The iconoclasts, have we heard the iconoclasm? That's essentially the time period in the church where there's a group saying that icons are bad. There's still some people in the world who are against religious images. That's iconoclasm, meaning if you find an icon or an image of Christ or of Mary or of the saints, what should you do? Destroy it. So during the iconoclasm, they were taking all of the religious art out of the churches, and what were they doing with it? They were burning it or destroying it in some way. How dare we try to capture this in this image of Jesus or Mary of the saints, this imperfect image? How it was that people were believing that somehow Jesus was present in that. Better for us to destroy these images, these icons, so that people don't fall into superstitious beliefs. Because what happens? You have that picture of Jesus, or that picture of Mary, or that picture of that saint, and what do people start doing? We all know they start praying to that image, that saint. Isn't that the criticism that's often leveled against Catholics? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's you Catholics, right? Mm-hmm. The iconoclasm was on one extreme. On the opposite, at the opposite extreme then was superstition, simply meaning, on the one hand, we have people who want to get rid of all images. We call them the iconoclasts. On the other hand, we have people who want to hold on to those images. No, I can't let go of that image because that image is special and has special powers. Ooh. So where do you fall on that issue? That was the debate back then. What are these images? Because there was sort of like there were two extremes here. One extreme was, let's get rid of the images, throw them out. The other was, oh, you can't throw away that image because that image has power. Where are we going with all this? So in this debate then, the Frankish theologians, those who were centered currently around what today is modern-day France. They were demanding that Pope Hadrian reverse his approval of the Second Nicene Council. So the Second Nicene Council came up with they reinforced this prototype image belief with respect to the icons as a sort of happy medium between these two. The Frankish theologian, though, tried to get him to reverse his approval of the council, and so the argument that they had was that icons are merely material. So these icons are merely material, and that they cannot contain mystery. So this picture of Jesus or of Mary, as beautiful as it is, it cannot contain Christ. Which side were they closer to? They were obviously, leaning in this direction. That image is just an image. It's just a material image. Someone painted it. Dulce sat down one day and painted that image of Mary, drew that image of Mary. Mary's not in that image. They were saying the divine presence is only contained in things created by God. So yes, the divine is in Dulce, because God created Dulce. Did God create that painting? Dulce created that painting. So the divine can be in Dulce. The divine can't be in anything that Dulce makes. So far so good? Whether that's Dulce's painting, whether that's Dulce's bread, whether that's anything else that we as human beings make, God can't be in those things.